my photo. Taste is the interest because they are the best.
Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Liz Wade.
And I'm Ryan Gertzma. Spotlight uses a special English method of broadcasting. It is easier for people to understand, no matter where in the world they live.
In 1996, a British woman finished writing her first book. The story was about a young boy who discovers that he has special magic powers. The writer wanted to publish her book, so she took it to a publishing company. The publishers liked the book. They thought young boys and girls would enjoy it. But they had a problem. They did not think that young boys would want to buy a book written by a woman. So, the publishers asked the writer to change her name.
This is the story of how Joanne Rowling became J.K. Rowling. The book was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the first in the popular Harry Potter series. Since that time, people have bought nearly 400 million copies of the Harry Potter books. In fact, Rowling became the first person in history to make $1,000 million from writing books. But Rowling was not the first female writer to change her name to hide her sex. Today's spotlight is on reasons why female writers use male pen names.
A pen name or pseudonym is not a writer's real name. It is a name that a writer chooses. Writers use pen names for many different reasons. Some writers simply want to hide their real name. Other writers use pen names because they think readers will better accept their writings. For example, some kinds of books are written mostly by one sex, or written by people from a particular culture. So, writers may change their names to be more like what readers expect. Other times, writers use pen names because they write about difficult and disputed ideas. By using a pen name, they protect themselves from trouble.
For much of history, most books have been written by men. Often, women's books were not well liked or popular. In 19th century England, many publishers would not consider printing a book written by a woman. When they did publish stories written by women, they were usually love stories. But they rarely published women's stories about culture, politics, and social issues. So women who wrote about these issues had a problem. Many female writers found a good solution. They changed their names.
This was true of Mary Ann Evans. Mary Ann Evans wrote one of the most famous books in the English language, Middlemarch. But Evans's name does not appear on the book's cover. Instead, the cover has her pen name on it, George Eliot.
Evans wrote this long and complex book over many years. Middlemarch was not a love story. It was a story about culture in England and how people treated women. Evans wrote about injustice, such as the terrible living conditions of poor people. She also wrote about politics.
Mary Ann Evans used a pen name for a very different reason than J.K. Rowling. Rowling changed her name to sell more books. But Evans used a male name because she did not think people in 19th century England would read or listen to her ideas because she was a woman.
Nadzeja Dmitrievna Hovashinskaya is another famous female writer who used a male pen name. She was a Russian poet and writer. Like Evans, she wrote during the 19th century. Hovashinskaya was from a wealthy family. She was interested in politics, and her stories contained many political ideas and issues. She wrote during a time when women could not speak about politics. So she had to find another way to share her ideas. This is why she wrote stories and sold them using the pen name V. Krestovsky.
Hovashinskaya's most famous book is The Boarding School Girl. This book is about a young woman named Lolenka. Lolenka attended a private school. In the story, she meets a man who is very involved in politics. The man encourages her to question what she has learned at school. The book discusses political issues. It supports doing extreme things to fight for a person's rights.
For Hovashinskaya, politics were very important. Using a male pen name helped her books get published. It also helped many people read her opinions. Hovashinskaya's writings were very popular in Russia. Her writings influenced culture. People enjoyed her humor. They enjoyed her funny way of looking at everyday life. But without her pen name, many people may have never read her work.
Like Hovashinskaya in Russia, Chon Bin-chi was a famous female writer. Bin-chi was from China. She was born in 1904. She began writing early in her life. She wrote many famous works of literature. And she also wrote a lot about politics. At this time, most Chinese writers were male. So Chan Bin-chi wrote using the male pen name Ding Ling. However, over time, most people recognized that Ding Ling was a woman.
Bin-chi's most famous book is called The Sun Shines Over the Sanggan River. This book was about politics in China and the rights of women. The book was very popular, but the book caused her much trouble. In 1957, political leaders forced her to leave her political party. And later, in 1970, the government sent her to prison.
The government released Bin-chi from prison in 1975. At this time, she was still very popular. She continued writing. She wrote many more papers and short stories about women in China. She also remained involved in politics until she died in 1986. Bin-chi's work helped many women in China. Did her pen name have any effect on her influence? Her pen name did not hide who she was, and it did not keep her from going to prison. But it may have helped her start writing, publishing, and gaining influence.
From George Eliot to Ding Ling, women from all over the world have used male pen names. And today, some female writers continue to use them for the very same reasons.
Do you have a favorite female writer? Does she use a pen name? Do you think male pen names help or hurt women writers? Tell us what you think. You can email us at radio@radioenglish.net.
The writer of this program was Diana Anderson. The producer was Ryan Gertzma. The voices you heard were from the United States. All quotes were adapted for this program and voiced by Spotlight. You can listen to this program again and read it on the internet at www.radioenglish.net. You can also find Spotlight on Facebook and Twitter. Just search for Spotlight Radio. This program is called Pen Names, Man or Woman.
We hope you can join us again for the next Spotlight program. Goodbye.
My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best. Flick to link, link to flick.
The Vietnam vet Marine who volunteered for 3 tours and got shot up in every one. In In 1971, he was medically retired because he had so much shrapnel in his body that he was setting off metal detectors. For the next 42 years, he suffered from nightmares, extreme anxiety in public, isolation, depression. He self-medicated with alcohol. He was married and divorced 3 times. Carlos had post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I became a psychologist to help mitigate human suffering. And for the past 10 years, my target has been the suffering caused by PTSD as experienced by veterans like Carlos. Until recently, the science of PTSD just wasn't there. And so we didn't know what to do. We put some veterans on heavy drugs, others we hospitalized and gave generic group therapy, and others still we simply said to them, just go home and try to forget about your experiences. More recently, we've tried therapy dogs, wilderness retreats, many things which may temporarily relieve stress, but which don't actually eliminate PTSD symptoms over the long term. But things have changed. And I am here to tell you that we can now eliminate PTSD, not just manage the symptoms. And in huge numbers of veterans, because new scientific research has been able to show objectively, repeatedly, which treatments actually get rid of symptoms and which do not. Now, as it turns out, the best treatments for PTSD use many of the very same training principles that the military uses in preparing its trainees for war. Now, making war, this is something that we're good at. We humans have been making war since before we were even fully human. And since then, we have gone from using stone and sinew to developing the most sophisticated and devastating weapon systems imaginable. And to enable our warriors to use these weapons, we employ the most cutting-edge training methods. We are good at making war. And we are good at training our warriors to fight. Yet when we consider the experience of the modern-day combat veteran, we begin to see that we have not been as good at preparing them to come home. Why is that? Well, our ancestors lived immersed in conflict, and they fought right where they lived. So until only very recently in our evolutionary history, there was hardly a need to learn how to come home from war because we never really did. But thankfully today, most of humanity lives in far more peaceful societies. And when there is conflict, we, especially in the United States, now have the technology to put our warriors through advanced training, drop them into fight anywhere on the globe, and when they're done, jet them back to peacetime suburbia. But just imagine for a moment what this must feel like. I have spoken with veterans who told me that one day they're in a brutal firefight in Afghanistan where they saw carnage and death. And just 3 days later, they found themselves toting an ice chest to their kid's soccer game. Mindfuck is the most common term. It's the most common term I've heard to describe that experience. And that's exactly what that is. Because while our warriors spent countless hours training for war, we've only recently come to understand that many require training on how to return to civilian life. Now, like any training, the best PTSD treatments require repetition. In the military, we don't simply hand trainees Mark 19 automatic grenade launchers and say, here's a trigger, here's some ammo, and good luck. No, we train them on the range and in specific contexts, over and over and over, until lifting their weapon and engaging their target is so ingrained into muscle memory that it can be performed without even thinking, even under the most stressful conditions you can imagine. Now, the same holds for training-based treatments. The first of these treatments is cognitive therapy. And this is a kind of mental recalibration. When veterans come home from war, their way of mentally framing the world is calibrated to an immensely more dangerous environment. So when you try to overlay that mind frame onto a peacetime environment, you get problems. You begin drowning in worries about dangers that aren't present. You begin not trusting family or friends, which is not to say that there are no dangers in civilian life. There are. It's just that the probability of encountering them compared to combat is astronomically lower. So we never advise veterans to turn off caution completely. We do train them, however, to adjust caution according to where they are. If you find yourself in a bad neighborhood, you turn it up. Out to dinner with family, you turn it way down. We train veterans to be fiercely rational, to systematically gauge the actual statistical probability of encountering, say, an IED here in peacetime America. With enough practice, those recalibrations stick. The next of these treatments is exposure therapy, and this is a kind of field training, and the fastest of the proven effective treatments out there. You remember Carlos? This was the treatment that he chose. And so we started off by giving him exercises, for him challenging ones, going to a grocery store, going to a shopping mall, going to a restaurant, sitting with his back to the door, and critically staying in these environments. Now, at first, he was very anxious. He wanted to sit where he could scan the room, where he could plan escape routes, where he could get his hands on a makeshift weapon, and he wanted to leave, but he didn't. He remembered his training in the Marine Corps, and he pushed through his discomfort. And every time he did this, his anxiety ratcheted down a little bit, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more. Until the end, he had effectively relearned how to sit in a public space and just enjoy himself. He also listened to recordings of his combat experiences over and over and over. He listened until those memories no longer generated any anxiety. He processed his memories so much that his
Flick to flick. Link to flick. My photo. Taste is the interest, because they are the best.